Imaging, Part 1. In this nugget, we take a look at imaging. This is Part 1, where we'll first of all take a look at some of the methods we've already seen for installing Windows 7. Just kind of a review of previous methods, only we'll get a little bit more clarity on some things. And we'll take a look at some of the newer methods to install Windows as well, including using portions of the Windows Automated Installation Kit, which includes the WinPE tools, which is command line tools that you can use to help smooth out the deployment process. We also take a look at Setup Information Manager, which certainly smooths out the process because you can use that to create answer files to automate your installations. We also take a look here at a reference image. This is going to be kind of a template or master image that we use to deploy to other computers. We'll take a look also at sysprep. This is going to be something that gives uniqueness to the reference image so that we don't have duplicate machines out there on the network and that they all have uniqueness. We'll also take a look at how to create the WinPE CD, which is kind of the foundation for doing the rest of what we need to do with imaging. And then in our next nugget, we'll actually take a look at capturing an image and deploying that image to multiple other machines. Alright, now we've talked about installing a couple of different ways to this point. We talked about a clean install, we talked about an upgrade, but what we haven't really discussed yet so much is how to deploy Windows for a larger organization. I mean, a clean install or an upgrade is fine for a home user or a very small business, but when you have dozens, hundreds, thousands of computers, what can you do to ease the pain of otherwise having to take a DVD around to every workstation? That's just not going to work. So what you can do with this instead is I'm going to show you here really a number of different methods that can be used. And let's say that this is me right here in the middle, okay? So this is me. And this kind of looks like me, by the way. If you've ever seen my picture, I am as bald as this person is. Although hopefully I'm not quite as androgynous looking as this guy. Anyway, so then I'm gonna put some hair on myself just to flatter myself a little bit. Okay, now I have about 7 hairs and I look like an 80s punk rocker or something like that. But here I'm gonna go around, and if I had to do this the most fundamental way, I would have to take the Install from Media DVD to each workstation, put it in, boot to the DVD, launch setup. Half an hour later, hopefully we can log on and get an operating system going there. That's really not practical, though. So what else could I do to ease the pain there? I'm going to kind of go from the worst way in terms of how time-consuming and how much manual intervention it requires, up to the best way, which would be a fully automated solution. So that's the worst way. To ease the pain a little bit, I could use something called an autounattend.xml file. Now this can go a number of different places. I could use CD burning or DVD burning software on my Windows 7 DVD. You know, most of the time we'll have an ISO file of it. And a lot of these products, I use a Magic ISO is the product that I use, and I can open up the ISO file and add or subtract or modify files to it. So I'll use something called the Windows, with the Setup Information Manager tool from the Windows Automated Installation Kit, create an autounattend.xml file which has all the answers in advance for me, what language I'm using, what keyboard layout I'm using, a lot of those different kinds of things, what the name of the user is that's going to be in the first logged on user. I can even supply the password, the product key, all these things, so that I don't have to manually type those things in at each workstation. And that's going to be a very practical way to go for most of us. So I can take that file and I can put it, in my actual DVD itself. That way when I boot up to it, I really can just walk on to the next machine. Because it's going to have all the answers it needs, and the next thing that you should see there that requires any intervention on your part would be just the logon screen for the first logon. But the autounattend.xml file can actually be placed on any removable media, and it also has to be named exactly that, autounattend.xml, as you see in the picture here. It could be put on a USB flash drive, so I pop in the DVD, but the autounattend.xml can be on a flash drive sitting on the USB port here. I can also put it on a floppy disk. Any removable media will work with that. So now I've helped to ease the pain a little bit in that I don't have to next finish my way through the installation. However, I still have to drag a DVD around to each machine. And we do that, when you have to walk the DVD to each machine here, we call that sneakernet, because you're wearing sneakers and you're using that kind of networking method to transport the data, so to speak. Although here in Phoenix, where it's going to be over 110 degrees this week, we wear flip-flops more frequently, so I guess here we'd call that flip-flop net. Anyway, to make that a little bit easier, not have to drag around a DVD and worry about it getting scratched or making enough of them to get to each of these machines, I might instead decide to use a file server, which would probably be the next level up in terms of simplicity. What we would do in this case is to take the entire contents of the DVD, copy it to a share on the file server, and then we would be able to boot from a WinPE DVD. Instead of the operating system DVD here, this would be a WinPE. Or you could put WinPE in a capture method on a WDS server, but we'll get to that later on. So I might have a WinPE DVD here that I boot from instead of having the operating system on it. Now, why would I do that? If I have to drag around a DVD anyway, what good is that going to do me? Well, it's probably still going to be a little bit faster because you're probably going to get faster reads from all the files that you need off of a file server than on the maximum read speed of a DVD reader, especially if you're using gigabit E networks. And what you would do with this is WinPE will drop you off at a simple command prompt, and you'll have to start the networking. So you would simply go to the command prompt there and type start net and press enter. And then you would map a drive to the file server, and this can all be scripted too. You could just launch a batch file, for example, that has start net, and then it has net use, drive letter, whack server, whack share. You could do it that way as well, and you could even have included in that batch file, or script if you want to use that, you could even have it included the setup command. Here, I'll just go ahead and show you what I might type as an example of this. So then offline here, which means I paused recording to do this, I went ahead and just typed in what I might use. This is just an example. You don't have to use it exactly like this, but this gives you an idea. I might type net start, followed by a net use, and then whatever drive letter I want. I could also use an asterisk, which would just use the next available drive letter, probably BZ anyway, since it maps from the end of the alphabet. And then I typed in the name of the server, DC Nugget 1, and the name of the share, Win7. Okay, if I've created a share like that. Then I changed that drive letter. And then if I copied all of the DVD files directly to that share, then all I would have to do then is type setup. Now, since it's included in this, if I could say this as a batch file, for example, then all I would do from the WinPE command line is type in the name of whatever I call this batch file and press enter. It would then run all of this for me. So that's just one sample of what you could do. And then beyond that, if you had also copied the auto1attend.xml file to the root of the WinPE DVD or CD, then it would do the actual rest of the installation automatically, just as I've mentioned earlier here. So that's one other thing that we could do there. Let me kind of clean up a little bit here. Get rid of some of these chicken scratch. The other thing we might consider doing is to use something called WDS, which I alluded to earlier and which we've already seen in demonstration a little bit. What we could do here then is we could copy our Windows 7 install.wim file to the WDS server. I showed you earlier how you could create, or rather add an image to that. Once it's on there, and all of these machines, if they're compatible with Pixie boots, and most of them are these days, then it'll pick up a DHCP address, IP address from my DHCP server. It'll locate my WDS server using DNS. It needs to have Active Directory. WDS images would then appear based upon my credentials that I enter in. And I could then, again, deploy Windows to each one of these machines, but this time, instead of using a file server, I can use Trivial File Transfer Protocol, TFTP. That's part of WDS, which is a more efficient transport mechanism than we might have otherwise. And we could also use multicasting. Okay, I'll just put mult for multicasting here. And that would be useful if I'm going to deploy to multiple machines at once. So this is probably the most efficient in terms of network bandwidth and also in terms of overall speed. If I want to more fully automate this, then I can create an answer file of some type. You can be named whatever I want to. I'll just call this one answer.xml, where this one has to be auto1attend.xml. This one you can name it whatever you want to. And then within WDS, you can point to that for your fully automated installation file. And from that point forward, it's actually pretty simple. The only manual intervention you have is to go to visit the workstation, and then you do have to start it up. You have to boot to the network, and from that point forward, then once you've selected your image, then you can pretty much go on to the next workstation and not worry about it. Now these would all be for clean installs, by the way. If I do an upgrade, I have to visit each machine manually with my DVD or connect to my file server, and I have to launch the installation from within my existing operating system, which can only be Windows Vista, as we learned previously. However, if I want to automate the upgrade, I can either do that partially or fully if I use System Center Configuration Manager. This is well beyond our scope, but just be aware of the fact that in a lot of larger organizations that really have to automate this as much as possible, they will likely be using SCCM or a third-party product that could also do this for us. And products like SCCM will also use the answer.xml files that you can work with to automate the solution for you. But beyond that, not only can they automate a full installation, but they can also automate an upgrade, which would otherwise not be possible because you'd have to sit at the workstation to launch the upgrade. Well, SCCM can push the upgrade to all of the client computers. So this kind of summarizes a lot of the different things that we've been taking a look at here for installations thus far, and hopefully that helps to cement some of the various methods. Now, a critical component of this in corporations is going to be able to create either your auto1attend.xml file or some other kind of an answer file here, which again is going to be in an XML format. And for doing that, you're going to need to use the Windows Automated Installation Kit, which is really a collection of tools. One of those tools will be a set of tools called WinPE tools, which again is Windows Pre-Installation Environment. To get to those tools, they actually will be located on the hard drive, and you can access them from your own command line. Just run a command line. It's probably best if you launch it as an administrator to make sure that you don't get locked out by privilege. And then the other thing you could do is to use the command prompt for WinPE tools. Once you've installed the Windows Automated Installation Kit, it will appear on the Start menu, and it's going to appear under Microsoft Windows Automated Installation Kit or Microsoft Windows AIK. And then you can just choose the Deployment Tools command prompt there. And you can see here, I just went ahead and clicked on it on my own machine. What it does is it creates a path statement for DISM, which is the Deployment Image Servicing and Management tool. Also the OSCD image, which is how you can create an image file like an ISO file. And ImageX, which is a critical tool for using to capture and deploy images. And then you can see here that it also takes us to the appropriate directory where we can start to work with some of these tools, and there are various other subdirectories underneath that, depending on your architecture, for example, for AMD 64 or 32-bit operating systems here. And then another critical component of the Wake really comes in the Setup Information Manager tool, or the SIM. This is where you're going to be able to create those XML files, such as auto1attend.xml or some other answer file that you could use, for example, with WDS or SCCM. What this does is it will open a disk-based WIM. Now, the reason why I point that out is because, remember, the WIM files we work with are really two files. One's called boot.wim, which is used to boot into the Windows pre-installation environment. The other one is install.wim, which is really the contents of all the Windows files that you need. You need to copy that from the Windows 7 DVD to a hard disk location. And the reason for that is because Setup Information Manager needs to create a catalog file that has to be written to the location of the WIM file. Well, you can't write to an optical media in this method. So you have to write to a location that supports read-write. That would be your hard drive in most cases. So you copy the file there, then you open up a disk-based WIM in Setup Information Manager. It creates the catalog. Now, that can take several minutes. What it does is it kind of analyzes the entire WIM file, and of course, it's going to be gigabytes in size, so it takes a little while to go through that whole thing, and then once it's created the catalog, you can then start to work with answer files. And you can see here that in advance, I've already opened up System Image Manager. Then, once I did that, I went here, down here, and I went ahead and opened an image. I right-clicked here, it shows Select Windows Image, and then I browsed for install.wim, where I'd already copied it to a local hard drive here. And then once you copy that in there and it creates a catalog file for you automatically, then you can see that there's components and packages here. A lot of what we'll be working with here is within components. And I'm going to tell you right from the beginning here two things. Number one, exhausting this really is not even possible, I don't think, in any series. There are thousands and thousands of different items here. We do talk about this in more detail in a different exam that we have from CBT Nuggets. That would be the 70-643 exam, so you can reference that if you like. Although, I don't want to leave you with any kind of an empty feeling here that I'm skipping over this either. So I do want to address how you can configure this, and I'm going to provide for you a sample auto.unattend.xml file, which if you put in your own product key, should be fully automated. So it has all the answers for you that you need. And in addition, I'm going to provide for you a PDF file, and these are all up on nuggetlab.com for you, that will provide for you a table of the answers that you need to provide. The reason why I do that, by the way, is because since there are thousands of different things in here, you don't have to answer all several thousands of these questions. In fact, I'll bet you that there's very few, if any, people at Microsoft that really have a full command of every single option within this. This is usually created by a team of employees, each one responsible for different components or different portions of this tool, and I doubt if anybody has got this whole thing memorized. But let me show you an example of how you use this tool. For example, here we see that we have under Components, AMD 64, Microsoft Windows. In the table that I provide for you here, and I'm going to drag that over here right now. I'm kind of make it a little bigger so you can see it. I don't really reference the first prepended part of that because that's going to be common across all the references. So all those components are going to be ignored, the prepend and numeric version numbers. And then we'll start with whatever's next there, which would be International Core Win PE, for example. And here we would go to, so for example, we'll ignore this whole first part, AMD, Microsoft, Windows, so forth. We're looking for International Core Win PE right here. Now, how do you know that it's not Windows International Core and instead it's Windows International Core Win PE? You don't. This is one of the baffling things about this whole tool. A friend of mine, Rhonda Layfield, has worked with this tool since it first came out and has made a full-time study of this. She worked on this for months and one of the only MVPs in the world regarding this tool and the whole automated deployment solutions that she comes up with here. Well, it took her months to figure out exactly which one of these things would work, and it is a lot of trial and error. Microsoft does have documentation on this, but I'll tell you also right now, it does have errors in it that can really send you down the wrong path and troubleshooting it for hours. So I'm not really very happy with some of the things I've seen there. Although it helps get you started on the right path, it can also be very, very frustrating. So anyway, we happen to know that we need to use this particular item. Now, in addition, you're not going to have an answer file up here. It'll just say there won't actually be one that you have. So what you'll do is to create a new answer file, and then these things here, you can see there's components underneath this right now. That'll actually be empty until you right-click here and choose Add Settings to Pass 1 Windows PE. What are these passes, by the way? An actual Windows installation has several different passes. And when you do this, you have to identify which component you wanted to add this into. Some of these different items will allow you to add them to multiple different passes. It might be possible to put it into Pass 1 and Pass 4 and Pass 7. And they won't be grayed out in those cases. They'll all be available. How do you know which one to use? Again, trial and error, and hopefully reading correct Microsoft documentation on this. This is actually sometimes a very frustrating tool to work with. But again, I've researched all of this, and I've done a lot of trial and error on my own, so I think I got you a good start on getting all the answers that you'll need to have. So anyway, you'll just continue to go through, if you want to do this on your own, continue to go through all of the automated installation answers. All the answers that I'm providing for you here are based upon an empty hard drive. So we're going to create our own partition. We're going to format it as a primary active partition, and then we're going to install Windows on that partition. That's all part of what this is. Where I create the partition, right here, I want to extend it, which means to use all available hard drive space. It's going to be the first drive, the first partition, excuse me, on the drive. And it's going to be a primary partition. There's also a modify partitions item, so I've decided to make it active after it's been created. I want it to be an NTFS partition. Oops, I accidentally changed that. Don't want to do that. I want it to be an NTFS partition. And then I'm going to label it Windows 7. This is something that's flexible, obviously. You can name it whatever you want to for the labeling of it. I'm going to give it drive letter C, and you see the rest. So there's all different kinds of things here that you need to be able to provide. Now, sometimes you're going to make a mistake. This thing is fraught with potential for human error. One of the things you can do, though, is to click this little button or Tools and choose Validate Answer File. And it will check through your entire answer file to see if there are any critical errors. If it sees a critical error, it'll give you a red symbol down here and tell you what the problem is. Then you can double-click right on it, and it takes you to the exact location you need to correct. That's pretty handy. I do like that. But otherwise, if you get just little exclamations like here, these are just usually informational. In fact, they probably shouldn't be exclamations. They probably ought to be little eyes. You know, sometimes Microsoft has that symbol for informational messages. That's going to be probably a better symbol that they would have used there. But anyway, this is a AutoAuto10.xml file that will work. And again, I've got a copy for you that you can experiment with and examine. So a key portion of this, and a lot of what makes this work as we move on here, is also going to be something called WIM files. We talked about that earlier. We saw install.wim, for example. And I mentioned earlier that that's also pretty much the entire contents of Windows. In fact, for Windows Vista and Windows 7, as well as 2008, the install.wim file actually contains all editions of Windows. Ultimate, Professional, Home Premium, all those different things are included in that install.wim file. And really, the edition of Windows that actually gets installed on the computer is based upon the product key. Once you enter in a product key, it's tied to a certain edition, and it will install that edition. WIM files, which are Windows imaging files, are going to be file-based. That's going to be important because there's other image capturing utilities that are used out there, such as Ghost and Acronis, that are mostly sector-based. And this means then that it'll take a snapshot of an existing hard drive and then you could deploy it to other machines. But as a result of that, it has to be exactly the same hardware on those destination machines, or at least very, very close in hardware. Otherwise, you dramatically improve the troubleshooting scenarios that you'll have to encounter because of hardware problems and not correct drivers being loaded and all of this sort of thing. But with a WIM file, what we have, since it's file-based, once you apply it to a destination machine, and if you've correctly used the sysprep utility, which I'll talk about shortly here in this same video, then what happens is the user boots up the computer for the first time after the WIM file's been applied, and it provides the same hardware detection as it would if it were a new installation installed directly from DVD. And it gives them the same out-of-the-box experience as if they turned on their computer for the first time. Because when you apply and expand the install.wim file, it really is pretty much the experience of a clean installation. Also, with WIM files, you can either use the one on DVD and again do a manual installation, or you can do something else called imaging, where you will capture a reference computer, put it on something like a WDS server, and apply it to other machines. I'll talk more about that here in a while as well, but let me move on. Second of all, you can also modify the WIM files. What if the WIM file that you have there is lacking certain drivers that you'll know you'll need to use for a new printer that was not included in the default Windows files? So now you need to, stuff in some drivers there, or maybe an update, or even a service pack. Well, you can modify the files. It's also hardware independent, which is different than sector-based images. Since it's hardware independent, I could possibly take one of these WIM files that I might have captured from a reference computer and apply it from a Dell computer to a Hewlett-Packard computer or a homemade computer, any other kind of computer. Since it's hardware independent, then the hardware detection will take place again as if it were a new installation. It's also using something called a single instance. Remember I said that the WIM files actually have all editions of Windows in it? Well, let's just say that, on an individual DVD, perhaps, maybe the Ultimate would have been, I'm guessing here, let's just call it 3.2 gigabytes. And maybe the Home Edition would have been, 2.9 gigabytes. Well, that would look like, oh boy, now I got to do math in my head. So that would be 66.1 gigabytes total is what that would look like. But since those are all packaged into a single WIM, what happens is we have something called single instance. Any files that are in common between these two only use the space of one file. So there's also some little bit of overhead involved in that. So in reality, and again I'm guessing here, you might have the combination of these two editions of Windows that might only take, let's say, 3.4 gigabytes or something like that. So it's very efficient, and it saves a lot of hard drive space, the fact that we can use something called the single instancing. Also, when you use these WIM files, and if you want to modify them, like maybe you do want to add some drivers, or you want to add user files of some type, whatever you want to do, you mount them with something called ImageX. Now, there's other methods for doing this. ImageX is the command line edition. There's probably more elegant ways to do this nowadays, but I'll show you those as we go. But you use ImageX to modify, at least in the most fundamental way, and you do need to know that ImageX can modify that image file. Once you mount this, you usually mount it with a mount /RW. What that does for you is it allows you to make the changes that are then read-write changes, so that when you commit the changes, after you're all done making your changes, it will then commit those changes to the actual WIM file. And while you've got that open, it actually allows you to browse the WIM file as if it were a drive on your local hard drive. So it's very intuitive and easy to work with. It's also you can also use WIM files because they're non-destructive in their deploy method if you want. Let's say that, for example, on your hard drive you have a C:\data Maybe there's already a data directory there. Well, the WIM file, if you decide to deploy it to the C drive, it's not going to overwrite or format the entire drive if you want. You can set it up so that the install.wim file will get copied to the drive and then expand itself, but leave this original data structure intact. So it's very flexible in that regard. I mean, of course, you could also obviously create an AutoAttend.xml file or some other kind of an answer file that does format the drive, but you don't have to. You can leave exactly, if you want to, intact data. Now, a big part of a corporate deployment is going to revolve around something called a reference image. This may also be called a template image or a master image, but most frequently reference. What this is it's going to be kind of your ideal desktop computer. It's exactly what you like. It's such a perfect machine, it actually has a halo hovering over the computer. That's how good it is, all right? This is usually something that's going to be a volume licensed computer, and you can use either multiple activation keys, which is a Mac license, or a key management service, or a KMS service. This is going to be more likely to be using something called KMS in corporate environments. What happens with this type is that each client actually has to be in contact with a KMS server, and it doesn't require activation directly with Microsoft computers. Mac keys will allow you to activate it directly against a Microsoft server, and the Mac keys will allow you to activate multiple machines, but it's still better for smaller businesses or businesses that aren't too big. KMS machines is going to be probably more frequently used. Now, the reason why this is of some importance is only because we don't want to be concerned about using retail keys. And with a retail key, which is what you would buy off the shelf at the electronics store, if you deploy that to a specific computer and then you redeploy it to multiple other machines, then you run into problems with having to activate the same key over and over again, and that looks suspicious, first of all, in terms of proper licensing. And it's also going to be illegal according to the actual licensing agreement, because you're only supposed to activate that on a single machine. So that's why you'll need to use volume licensing there. Now, this is all more information that you need to know. Just know that it has to be volume licensed to be ideal. Also, you can apply updates to the machine. So this is ideal because I don't want to deploy a reference computer to multiple destination hosts and then have to apply a service pack to them all, which could take a couple hours depending on the size of the service pack. I'd rather have all the updates applied right now and have it as up to date as possible before I deploy it, so we don't have to have as many updates on the destination computers. Also, I want to use whatever my corporate default user interface settings are. If we have custom wallpaper for the corporation, I want that on the wallpaper. If we have shortcuts that I want to be on every desktop, I might put those on there. Changes to the start menu. Anything else that we want. Maybe I want, for example, a shortcut on the desktop that points to our corporate intranet web page. Maybe I want that. So I can put all that together. Also, any applications that I want installed, I might install those in advance. Maybe we've got a volume license for, maybe WinZip or something like that. Or I could also use a packaged installation. What I mean by this is, for example, maybe I wanted to install Office. Well, this can be done a number of different ways, including using the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, which I may reference a little bit later on here. But I can also do this kind of in a manual method so that I can include maybe in a startup file of some type or a logon script, MSI exec. Okay, MSI exec. You'll notice that most current applications that install use MSI files. It might still say setup.exe, but usually it'll point to an MSI file. MSI exec will allow you to work with those packages. So I might do MSI exec space /I, and then it would point to a package of some type. For example, with Office 64-bit edition, it would be Office, I'm going to run out of space here, Office 64, and this is supposed to be all on one line, MUI.MSI. Okay, so that might be an example of how you would work with that. This could be something that would be added into my existing package and set to launch upon the first boot of my destination computers. Although I think there's probably better ways to do that, I would still know for the exam objectives that you could use MSI exec space /I and then followed by the name of the package, which would be Office 64 MUI.MSI as an example. And then you can also use sysprep with these as well. In fact, you have to use sysprep in a smart deployment of a reference image. I'm going to talk next here about SysPrep, and I'm also going to show you a diagram that kind of pulls all of this together for us so that we kind of have a visual fix on how all this works. So what goes on here with SysPrep is that it removes the uniqueness of these computers and it gives them something else called the out-of-the-box experience. But let's talk about the uniqueness first. First of all, it removes things such as hardware IDs. The result of this will be, on my reference computer, after I've run SysPrep, I want to take that reference image and apply it to other computers throughout my organization that will then duplicate the exact configuration of the reference computer. The problem is, if they all have the same hardware IDs, then that might not be ideal, because the computers will expect to see certain hardware, and then if they don't, that could cause problems. Plug and play may kind of, self-heal some of that for us, but it would be better if we were to strip out the hardware IDs, because then when those computers start up for the first time, then it will run plug and play detection as if the Windows operating system were installed cleanly. Also, it'll remove security identifiers. Each computer has a unique security identifier that it cannot have duplicated anywhere, otherwise that causes problems. Also, computer names have to be unique on the network, so I want that to be neutralized. And if I have domain membership on my reference computer, I want to remove that and change that over to a work group, and that's exactly what SysPrep will do for us, and I'll show you that here. Alright, so here's my perfect machine. It's got the exact desktop that I want, the exact start menu, maybe applications are pre-installed. I got the shortcuts on the desktop and everything. It's such a beautiful machine that I'm even going to give it a little halo here. Okay, it's got a halo hovering right over it, talking about how good it is. Woo, heavenly music plays and everything like that. So once we get this machine like we like it, then I want to say, hey, this is such a perfect machine. Wouldn't it be great if I could duplicate that to all these other computers, and then I wouldn't have to go back and manually reconfigure them to try to be as good as their big brother. Well, we can do that using a number of different tools, but primarily something like Windows Deployment Services. Thing is, like I said with SysPrep, I have to remove all of the uniqueness here. So I'll configure this exactly the way I like it, the halo's glowing and everything, and then I'll run SysPrep. That will neuter everything, or neutralize everything about this machine. Boy, neuter it. Boy, this computer would get really nervous if I told it I was going to neuter it. Anyway, so it'll neutralize all those uniqueness factors. Once that's been neutralized, then I will be able to use any number of a couple of different tools here really to capture this computer in what we call a capture WIM. Okay, and that will be saved as, for example, capture.wim on my WDS server down here. All right. Now, once this is a capture.wim file that has all the configuration I want, I can deploy that almost infinite number of times to destination computers, and they will all then also have the same angelic glow about them because they are exactly like their big brother now and have the exact same configuration. And all these computers here then would also have something called the out-of-the-box experience, or UBI. This means that it's going to do a number of different things as if the computer were installed for the first time, such as hardware plug and play. It's going to have the user log on for the first time and answer a certain number of questions, the same as if they had installed for the first time. It's going to uniquely generate those other things that are supposed to be unique, such as the SID, the hardware identifiers, things of this nature. Also, there's things that are going to have to be done over again here. For example, maybe my reference computer was a member of the domain. Well, now I may have deployed this to 100 computers out here. Now none of them are members of the domain. Does that mean the administrator has to go back and revisit each machine and manually add it to the domain or use some other kind of method? Not necessarily, because you can also, again, use the Setup Information Manager tool to join these computers to a domain, and then when you use SysPrep on the reference computer, you can point it to your answer file. You'll just use the unattend switch, point it to an answer file, and what happens then is that when these computers boot up for the first time, they'll find the answer file, which is included in the image, and then they will pre-answer all of the questions so that they don't have to answer any of the out-of-the-box experience questions. They don't have to join it to the domain. So there's a lot of automation that can still take place there. So going back here, what SysPrep does, you remove the uniqueness. Then what we would do is we would capture the generalized image that SysPrep has delivered to us. Then you can deploy it to multiple machines without being concerned about any of the uniqueness factors. All right, now let's go ahead and get a visual on some of the tools that we've been talking about. For example, the System Image Manager can be used to create an AutoAttend.xml file. Here I've created one of those files, the same one that you can download. I've put it on my floppy disk in a virtual machine, and I'm pointing the virtual machine to a Windows 7 Ultimate DVD. Now, besides the fact that I added in my product ID to my answer file in order to make it fully automated, it's again the same one that you can download. Here I'm going to just go ahead and boot to the DVD. It's going to also see that it has an AutoAttend.xml file on the removable media, which in this case is a floppy disk, and you can see that it's loading files. Now, we could just stare at this for the rest of the time, but I'm going to go ahead and pause recording and only resume when I see something of significance, but there really shouldn't be a whole lot to see because the whole installation process will now be automated. The next thing I would really see would be the logon screen that requires my interaction at least. All right, here we can see that it didn't ask me any questions about language or keyboard layout or any of those kinds of things. That was already included in the answer file, so it's gone ahead and copied the files, and now it's starting the process of expanding those files. All right, then, after having rebooted a couple of times, you can see here that now the machine is starting up, getting ready for its first logon, checking video performance. It's doing all those same things that it would have done in a clean install, and yet I haven't had to touch this computer one time to answer any questions. And then that's pretty much it. Now I'm ready to log on for the first time. I specified a password in the answer file, so I just type in that same password here. The account has already been created for me as a local account, and we'll get our desktop, and that's it. All right, so here you can see that I've now successfully logged on. I've also done a few other things because I want to use this as my reference machine. So I installed WinZip. I just had the trial version installed, but maybe you have a volume license that you want all the users to have. I also have the calculator item here. Maybe this is for my accounting department, and I'm too cheap to buy them all adding machines, so I tell them they have to use Windows Calculator. I've also put the libraries right on the desktop so that it's quickly and easily accessed. You can access the documents and whatnot. And so this might be my ideal machine for all of my my users. Now I want to point something out here as well. This is something that my friend Mark Manassi came across, and I want to point this out to you. It's not going to be on the exam, I'm pretty sure, but it is something that you might need to know for practical reasons. If I go take a look at my advanced system settings and then go to user profiles here, notice that there's a default profile as well as the user that I'm logged on currently right now as. Now, the problem with this is what we'll normally do is we'll configure this profile, and that would be this one, for example, exactly the way we want. Then we would log on as a different administrator profile, select this profile, and choose Copy To. Problem is, it won't let you do that like it did in previous versions of Windows. This appears just to be a bug, and to confirm that, I've gone to this machine here. This is my actual desktop computer, and you can see here that I'm logged on as this user right now, but even if there were another user account here that I wanted to copy to the default profile, it's all grayed out. None of these work. So it's kind of a bug right there. In order to resolve that and get around that issue, Mark has recently published an article for us. And here's the URL that you can see from his website there. But basically, I'm going to get to the meat of the issue right here. And he describes this whole problem here. And then what he does is he uses the Setup in System Image Manager here, which I've talked about before, to create an answer file. And then all we can do is copy this. Now, he's given us permission to copy this and save it into Notepad as whatever file name you need. It doesn't even have to have an XML extension. But if you reference it in your sysprep, when you use sysprep on this reference machine and reference this answer, then it will automatically create a copy of the profile that you need. And you can see here that I've just gone to my local hard drive here, drive C. I created a folder called sysprep answer and put a default user file in there. And you can see here that what it does is it will then copy the profile. It sets that flag to true. Also notice another thing it does here. Again, I don't think this is part of the exam for you, but it does use the skip rearm item here as well. You see, what happens with Windows licensing and sysprep is that when you run sysprep, it will only allow you to reactivate this machine 3 times total. So if I have 3 different revisions, and then I can continue to deploy an image based on this, but on the 4th revision, maybe I added a service pack or something like that, well then it will no longer be allowed to properly activate. So that could be a big problem for us. So you can use that skip rearm item, and it will no longer have that particular issue. But in order to continue here, what I want to do is to go to All Programs, Accessories, then I'm going to right-click on the command prompt, and I'm going to choose Run as Administrator because SysPrep does have to be run as an administrator, and I'd also have to change to the SysPrep directory here. And then you can see here that if I do a dir, indeed there's the SysPrep utility. All right, so let's go ahead and run SysPrep here. So what happens here then is I'm running SysPrep with the generalized option, which will then neutralize that computer. You remove all the uniqueness. Ubi, which is out-of-the-box experience, which gives the user the same experience they have when they first boot up a computer with a new installation. It'll ask them, a lot of questions, but they're all easy. Any user can probably answer them, like whether or not they want to use Windows Update and so forth. And realistically, in corporations, no matter what the user chooses there, it's going to be overridden by group policy. Because by group policy, normally we'll use Windows Server Update Services to automatically update our clients regardless of what the user wants. Also, unattend, and then this is the path to my unattend file, sysprep answer / and then the name of the file is default user.txt. So it's at this point, I'll be pretty much ready to go ahead and launch this. Now it's going to go ahead and run sysprep. Now I also want to point out that you can just type sysprep from the command prompt and press enter, and it will open up a UI edition of this, which may be a little bit simpler. If you don't have anything like an unattend file, it might be just as easy to work with. It'll give you an option for generalize and Ubi. So if you prefer a UI, you can do that. On the other hand, if you have an unattend file, you need to type it in from the command line. Microsoft kind of likes us to know how to work with the command line edition, though, so I would be aware of these various switches. Now, before we move on, I want to talk to you about several key deployment tools of which you'll need to be aware for exam objective purposes. Some of these are included in the Wake, some of these are just standalone, but these are just key deployment tools that are available for you up on NuggetLab.com. And here we have, for example, the Deployment Image Servicing and Management, or DISM. This is a tool that you can use to do a lot of other things in addition to deploying Windows. You can insert language packs, drivers, updates. So it's a pretty handy way of working with a Windows image. Now, a lot of those things can also be done even from the command line, but boy, they sure can be complicated and difficult. The DISM is going to make that an awful lot easier. It gives you a UI to work with. There's also ImageX. Now, it's expected that you know how to use ImageX for exam objective purposes, so I'd be well aware of this. What it allows you to do is to capture images, create and modify and apply Windows images. We'll be practicing that here in a little while. There's also OSCD Image. What this does is it allows you to create an ISO image, particularly of a WinPE boot CD or DVD. That's probably the primary way in which you'll use this. Once you've created the ISO, you can use a virtual machine to point to that ISO file and then use it as necessary, or you could actually burn it to a DVD or a CD if you like. You will have to use a third-party product to burn those ISO images. I use Magic ISO. There's also User State Migration Tool. We talked about that in a previous nugget. Just be aware of that tool. And Windows PE Tools, which is actually a collection of several tools, some of which are listed here. ImageX, OSCD Image, there's copype.cmd. That's all part of the Windows PE Tools. It's just a collection of tools for the Windows pre-installation environment. There's also this, copype.cmd. This actually has a problem with it, which I'll talk to you about here in a while. But it's got a key component left out of it from Microsoft. I don't know if someone dropped the ball and they forgot to add a line to it or whatever, but if you use copype.cmd the way it is, it's going to cause you some frustration. What this does is it copies the file that comprises a WinPE bootable CD. But there's a critical file that's missing that will not allow you to boot from that CD. So it's going to be something I'll share with you here in a moment. There's also this item, WinPE-shell.ini. That simply allows you to create a customizable Windows PE shell. I don't really see a lot of purpose for that right now, but if you wanted to, you could do that. I just want you to be aware of the fact that it's available. You would just open this up in Notepad and add your own requirements to it. And then there's also this Windows Setup Information Manager. We've already talked about that a little bit. And although you can do a few different things with it, the main thing with it that you'll do is to create answer files. Now, I'm going to go ahead and work with some of these tools here in order to create the WinPE environment. Now, why do I want to create WinPE? Well, you just saw me sysprep an image, sysprep a computer, that is. What I want to do is to create an image of this that I can then deploy to other computers. Thing is, I don't really have a good facility or ability to do that yet. I need to use some of these tools to be able to get there. Alright, now what I need to do is to create my bootable WinPE CD or DVD. It doesn't matter which media you use, or you can just stick with the ISO if you're using virtualization. Anyway, the way that's going to be created is that I'm going to run a command line here from the WinPE tools, okay, the PE tools. So it's just going to be copy pe.cmd. Again, there's a problem with that I'll talk to you about in a moment. And then it's going to be the architecture that I want, which would be AMD 64. Okay, because I'm using 64-bit operating systems. And then I enter in a destination. How about d:/WinPE? Now, this destination that I specify must not already exist. It will be created by this command. So I'll just press enter here. We see that it copies a bunch of files over there and everything looks fine. But there's actually, like I said, a little bit of a problem with this. Let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. You see, in this, let me go to the directory. In the PE tools directory, there's this copy pe.cmd that I just used. If I open that up, we can see what it's doing. Its primary job here is to copy a bunch of files. Copy, 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 and so on. Problem is, it missed a file. The file that it's missing is boot.wim. Let me show you. Here's the WinPE directory that I just had it create. And if I drill down through this thing and go into ISO and sources, wait a minute, sources, there's supposed to be something in here. It's supposed to be a boot.wim file there, but guess what? There isn't anything. So what we have to do is manually go to this winpe.wim file and copy it. By the way, if you don't do what I'm about to show you, then when you try to boot off the WinPE disk, it'll give you a baffling error message with no logging of any kind, and you won't have any idea what went wrong, even though you did everything Microsoft said you were supposed to do. You could spend hours trying to chase this thing down. And don't ask me how I know about that, by the way. So anyway, you copy this winpe.wim, then you'll go into ISO, sources, paste it into this directory, all right? Then you need to rename it to boot.wim. Now, I just saved you a bunch of time there, folks, because if you don't do what I just showed you, it will not boot properly or at all, and you'll have lots of problems with this. In this nugget, we took a look at imaging. This was part one, where we started off by taking a look at an installation review so that you can see, kind of in a more comprehensive view, the various methods that are possible to install Windows. Of course, the main thing that we want to focus on from this point forward is more of an imaging type of a format, and you can use the Windows Automated Installation Kit as a big part of that. And you saw that there are several command line WinPE tools that you can use, and which I showed you. There's also the Setup Information Manager, which is very useful in automating your deployment of Windows machines in true installations. We also looked at reference images. This is a big part of imaging, obviously, as well. This is going to be, of course, your ideal computer that you want to duplicate onto multiple other computers. We looked at sysprep as a way of neutralizing the uniqueness of that reference image so that you don't have duplicate IDs of various types throughout the network. And we looked at how to create the WinPE CD, which is kind of the foundation for being able to boot those other machines and capture or apply various images. And we'll take a look at that in more detail in our next nugget. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.